than your currency. Splurging millions, buying houses like Monopoly. Fucking 9 to 5 minimum.
Hey guys and girls, welcome to this week's episode of the No BS with Birchy podcast. I'm your host Nathan Birch, and this is a show unraveling the truth to the facade of the 21st century. We're now exiting the matrix and waking up to motherfucking reality. Guys, I have this week something really cool to talk about, and that is, what would Birchy do? Today we have some questions and some scenarios here, and these are very in-depth scenarios from you guys as to what would I do if I was you in your shoes. So I'm going to run through, I'm going to get through as many as I can, and let's get straight into it. So, always, I'm not a financial advisor. None of this is financial advice, and nor does it constitute that. If you need that, reach out to my team. You can contact us. You know where to find us, 1300 367 925. Hit us up on all our socials, whatever. Get in contact with us if you need some specialized advice. But these are just me answering some of the questions as to what I would do in these scenarios. This is from you guys in the community. You can keep these questions coming through as what would Birchy do, and I will answer them for you. So the first one is, I have not even seen these questions. I'm literally picking this up the first time. My partner and I make 200 grand a year, excluding super, have a modest mortgage and looking for investment properties as well as a lifestyle change in the future. Currently on holidays in Noosa. Sounds good. I like Noosa. That's good. And found myself looking at properties which may find on the northern regions, $2 million or even $7 million. How are people affording multi-million dollar properties, and how can I get started? It's a good question. I always think about, like I live in Sydney, but I have a holiday house, and when I walk around the area, I just saw one the other day sell for $7.5 million, and my one's not one like that. It's nice, but it's not that. And I think to myself, who owns these properties, right? Who's owned these properties today? Who owned them in the past? And who will own them in the future? And always think about it. It's like, these people may have owned these properties for 20 years. They may have owned them for 30 years. They may have sold their property, when this area was not as great, right? Like, we're looking at the Sunshine Coast at the moment, and the Sunshine Coast is booming, but it wasn't always booming. I actually did some bank repossession purchases in the Sunshine Coast going back about 8 years ago, and these properties, like, I got one, for example, that I paid, I think, $370K for. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-story penthouse, and it overlooks the whole region. And I think it's worth about $1.2, $1.3 million now. I certainly didn't pay that. I bought it when the market was crap. So imagine if I was just the average person in Sydney, and I had a 3-bedroom red brick house that might be worth $1.5 million now, but I sold it when it was worth $800,000, and I moved there before that market took off, right? All markets within the country are not linear, they're counter-cyclical. So while some markets may be going crazy, not all markets will be going crazy as well. So it could be that they've owned it for a long time. It could be that, they've bought in at a good point. Just because the property's worth $7 million today isn't the fact that the person paid $7 million. If someone's paying $7 million, what did they own before that? Could they have sold a business? Could they have sold another premium sort of property? Is someone upgrading from another type of asset? Who knows where they're coming from? But there are ways for people to get there. Like, I've got multiple clients that have been able to get their dream homes, their forever homes. One of our viewers, one of my clients, had a really ripper of a year last year. They did really, really well with the portfolio, got over 20 properties in their portfolio last year and added it there. They just bought a new house. They're relocating from Sydney to Queensland, and their property that they bought was quite a nice place, and it's a home that they want to stay there to retire in. When they pay that mortgage off, they'll be able to sell their property in Sydney, which has gone up a lot, but it'll go up even further by the time they go to physically relocate and retire and quit their jobs, so they can use their assets to get there. So I guess with looking at that question and breaking it down, how would someone afford to get there? I think a lot of the ways would be assets to get there. You need to have assets. Your wage is not going to get you there. It doesn't matter if you earn 500 grand a year. It's going to be, if you earn 500 grand a year and you wanted to buy a $7 million property, you're going to have to put down $1.5 million as deposit, probably $500,000 in stamp duty. So there's $2 million cash that you have to stick up from the start. And that's if the bank would give you an 80% lend on such a high value sort of asset. And then if you had a loan at $5 million or $5.5 million at, say, 4% interest rate, that's $200,000 a year. That's going to wipe out most people's wages in a total year. That's just covering the interest component. So a wage will not get you into a lot of these assets today. What will get you there is a collection of different assets that you could have, that you could, push yourself into that level. Out of all the properties that I've bought, every time I've bought a bigger one, and I just settled on one a few weeks ago, which was my biggest property ever. I paid 4.2 for that. It was a resort. And as I look at these properties that I'm buying, I'm thinking, how did I get to this point? Because if you had told me 10 years ago that I'd be doing whatever I'm doing today 10 years ago, I'd think that you're a liar. It doesn't even matter how great I thought of myself. I wouldn't have thought that I could be doing certain things. And the only reason why I can do that is the decisions that I took back then in 2010, for example, collecting assets, getting things, have allowed me to be able to jump into whatever I'm doing today. So build up. Like when people buy their first home, everybody starts out by buying some sort of property as their first home. Very rarely does someone buy their forever home as their first property that they ever buy. They go, okay, this is what I can afford, this is what's in my budget, and then they'll continue to buy and continue to buy. 99% of the population, let's say 80% of the population, would have one stream of income. That income would be either from their job or from their business. But growing out to as big as you want to be and getting as much stuff as you want, you need more than one stream of income. So you could have a job and a business. You could have 2 businesses, you could have 5 businesses, you could have 10 businesses, you could have some products that you create, you could have things that you could sell for a royalty, you could have assets as far as properties go, you could have cryptocurrency, you could have shares, you could have multiple different ways of creating assets and income. So I know when I walk down the beach and I see all the waterfront properties around my holiday house, I would find it very hard to believe that any of those people would have bought those properties just having a job. I don't think anyone's taken a mortgage and they go, okay, we're going to go to work today, love. We're going to go and pay the mortgage. Let's go down and, work in the whatever job it is. I think they would have been business people. I think they would have been investors. And I think they would have been old money. It would have been a mixture of those 3 things. So when you look at those properties, don't look at them go, it's out of my reach. I always question, how do I get there and how do I make it happen? So that's just my answer for that one. Number 2, single here, working full time, earning $85,000 a year. I only have HEX debt, looking to get in the market, but not sure how to, have $50,000 sitting in the bank. How would you invest it? As I said at the start of this, I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. I'm just a dude telling you what I would do. So if I was starting out again, it's actually much better than the position of that I was in when I bought my first property. So my first property that I bought was out in Western Sydney. I paid $248,000 for it. It was a house on land. It's probably worth about $950, $1 million today. My income was about $40,000 at the time. I had saved up about $40,000. I was working jobs from the age of 13 to the age of 18 when I could sign a contract. It was full-time employment for a year, and I had about $40,000 saved, $40,000 income, bought a property. At that point, when I bought a property at $248,000, the rent was only $190 per week, and interest rates were about 8% and went to about 9% afterwards. So, looking at that, I was a single person, 18 years old, and the position here that I'm presented with is better than the position that I had. The only thing I didn't have was HEX debt because I didn't go to uni. What would I do? I would be doing the same thing that I did to get to where I am, but you can't do identical to what I did because you can't go, like my first properties that I bought were out in Mount Druitt and different areas around there in Western Sydney, and they were like $200,000, but now they're like $1 million. So you can't go and buy that specific property, but the parameters of what I bought, I would go and do the same. So I would find an area that's in a metro region where I could pick up something for $250,000, a house, a unit, townhouse, whatever. And they're definitely out there. You can still buy in capital cities for $200,000, maybe a little bit less than $200,000, maybe $160,000, $170,000 to get into a capital city and have a positive cash flow, which I didn't have back in the day, have a cheaper interest rate, which I didn't have back in the day, and be able to get equity so you can redeploy it. So if it was me on $50,000 cash, I would buy my first property. I'd try and keep it around $200,000 to $300,000. I'd try and keep it with good equity, so I could go back, pull out that equity, and go again for number 2 pretty quickly. I've seen people in this is the average sort of position that my investors have, of about 80 to 100 grand, maybe 60 to 100 grand, and I get them to 3, 4, 5 properties within a year between $50,000 and $100,000 in capital. So having that position, you're in a great spot. I could see someone in a position like that getting to 10 properties in about 3 years if they apply themselves, are committed, are focused, and are willing to do whatever it takes to get there. So I'd start off with the first one. I'd buy something that's basic, bread and butter, good foundation property that's good upside for growth, but having strong cash flow and good equity in it. That's what I would be doing. 3, I'm looking for my next home. I currently have a little over 30% deposit saved. I'm wondering if I should put down the full 30% or instead 20% with the remainder kept in the mortgage offset account. Reason being is that I'd hope to save some of that money for a rainy day, holiday, new car, whatever. This one here, I'm going to put that disclaimer on again. I'm not a financial advisor, right? And even financial advisors giving you advice, a lot of them are crap and they give really shit advice. So on that note, right, I think about my position today, and I start all my loans off when I get a property as an interest only, right? And then after 5 years, they turn from interest only to principal and interest, and naturally I'll let them go there. So if you're buying a property today that's interest only, and then it goes to principal and interest in 5 years, what would happen is over 5 years, your rents would increase, and with that extra cash flow from the rents increasing, I would use that to pay down the debt. I don't service to go back and refinance all my loans and all that sort of stuff because I broke the bank sort of system of assessing me and all that. My loans are just paying themselves off. It makes me cringe because I think back and I think, if I could pay, let's say I paid off $1 million worth of loan today. If I had $1 million in the bank and I could pay out $1 million worth of loan, let's just say that we only had that one scenario: $1 million property, $1 million loan, $1 million in the bank, hypothetically, right? The loan at 3% would cost $30,000 a year in interest. If I took the $1 million, put it on the loan, it means I'd have no debt, and it means I'd save 30 grand a year, which would sound like a fantastic outcome in the old days, because the debt, you've got to understand how that works, you've got to understand how inflation works, you've got to understand what's going to happen with your property and with the cash flow. Instead of paying out the debt, if it was me, I'd rather leave that $1 million loan against a $1 million property and take the $1 million and buy another property for $1 million. That would mean that I would have $2 million worth of exposure in the market. If I paid out that $1 million loan and I had a $1 million property and the market doubled, that $1 million would turn to $2 million. That's all I'd have. But if I sold that property for $2 million, whatever I bought would have gone up with inflation as well, and I wouldn't have any purchasing power. I would have been in a neutral position. If I had that same $1 million property and I bought a secondary one, I would have $2 million worth of asset. If the market doubles, that would turn to $4 million, meaning that I'd be $2 million in advance from there. Looking at the debt component, if I bought $1 million extra worth of property and that bought me in 7% return, that means I would get 70 grand a year worth of cash flow, and my debt would be 30 grand worth of cash flow, meaning that I'd be $40,000 a year better off. And the final part is that if I look at $1 million and I got to pay out a loan of $1 million, then I look at the opportunity cost of not having that capital because I've got debt that's in today's dollars and I'm buying an asset or whatever I'm buying that could be inflated. Even if you just bought a car, right? Even if you didn't buy a house, and I'm not suggesting to go buy cars or whatever. If you bought a car and that car went up in value, you could use that car, you could sell it later, take the profit, and then go pay out the loan with the money from the car. You would have paid off that debt because the debt is losing its value. So a lot of people ask me, should I pay off a mortgage? Personally, I think paying off the mortgage is the dumbest thing you could do because you're just saying you can't get a better return than 3% interest, right? You are then losing all of the opportunity cost on that money for having any capital growth because you're just paying out a loan. I'd rather have something that could expand with inflation and go up with inflation with me. So for me, paying out debt, I always try to put down a 20% deposit and that's it. Right? 20% deposit, a lot of people say, I'll put 5% deposit down, all that sort of stuff. 20% is better because you've got a bit of protection there, you've got a buffer, it's easy to get the loan, it's better to get the loan product without the mortgage insurance. And then, people, if you want to put down more into the account, let's say you pay off the property, you go from a 20% deposit, you pay down 30% of it, and you have 50% of the property paid off. Let's assume that you got yourself into an ugly position. Let's say that something went wrong health-wise, let's say something went wrong financially for you, whatever, and you needed money. Like, we've just seen 2 years where people have lost their jobs, they don't have finances, all that sort of stuff. If you lost your job and then you went to the bank and go, shit, I could really do with some money right now, when you go to the bank, you're going to have to beg them to give you your money back. So you're giving the money back to the bank. You're losing your loan. The loan is becoming the asset because the value of the money is becoming so cheap and the cost of that loan is so cheap to service. So in my view, I would put down a 20% deposit, leave it at that. And with that extra capital, I'd put towards some sort of other asset, whatever it's to be. The worst investment, I believe, in 2022 is having cash. Fourth one is interested to see what your opinions are. Currently looking to buy our first house with a family member in Perth and looking to spend 500 to 600 on preferably a 4x2 or a 3x2. I know the Perth market quite well, depending on what area you're looking at. And you can buy a property for 300 grand, 400 grand. Like, it's not Sydney where you have to pay $1 million to start getting into an ex-housing commission fibro house. Question I'd ask is the family member, what is the benefit of going into the property with a family member? Let's assume that, there's two Nathans, right? I was meant to be a twin. Funny story, I was meant to be a twin, the other one died. Imagine having two Birchies, right? So always say I've got an older ego, and let's say that we've got two Birchies, right? We've got me and a twin. Let's say that we go to the bank says, okay, Nathan, you can, borrow $1 million, and they go to the twin and says, okay, you can buy $1 million, right? That means that we could buy $2 million worth of property. If we went and bought a property together and went halves and we went and bought $1 million asset, when the bank looks at us, they will account me for being at 100% of that loan of $1 million. They would also take the other person at $1 million worth of their loan as well. So therefore, you're really stuffing up your servicing by carrying another person. I always think if you can buy the property yourself, then go and buy the property yourself and don't involve other people. The other thing to see, I've seen this a lot with families over the years, is that let's assume that you've got two siblings. Let's say one's 25 and one's 30, and you go halves in a property today. And then 5 years passes and the 30-year-old is now 35 and the 25-year-old is now 30. The 35-year-old is settling down, having kids, having a family. The 30-year-old is now traveling, doing Kentucky tours and exploring the world. The person that's got the house, the person that's 35 might be having a family, they may want to sell the property. The person at 30 may be wanting to keep the property. So at different phases of your life, you might be in a very awkward position with your family member where one may want to sell and the other one wouldn't want to sell. And that would put adversity and conflict between the both of you. So just think about the longer term picture. If you're going into business with someone, is it the right thing to be doing with your family? Very, very rarely. I've never seen this. I'll actually go to the point of saying I've never seen it actually work out like really well by having a family member involved. It's better to do the asset yourself than to involve a family member. If you can't do that size of a property, maybe go for a cheaper property and do it yourself rather than going in with a family member, just because it'll bring problems in the future. My answer to that. Here we go. Here's another question. Weighing up two potential options. Buy when our current lease is up in 6 months with 95 combined savings, put it towards, or try to sign 6 months more, thus spending 12 grand on where we're renting, having 115,000 in savings to put us towards it, but risk is currently property prices are worsening when the WA borders eventually open up. Look, we're at a point where we've got high inflation. The Perth market is very hot. Lots of things moving over there. The prices, it's very, very hot market. I'm losing a lot of deals because there's a lot of activity in that market. if it was me, I'd probably get in the market quicker than the later. That would be my view. And if it's a deposit that you're concerned about, if it's a house that you're going to be living in, that may be one of the only times when I'd consider doing a 10% deposit over a 20% deposit, because if you have to wait to save up, then the market's going to be taking off. And if it's your principal place of residence and you're doing it for that, it might be better off, exploring that option rather than doing it with a family member to use their cash, going in getting a bit of a higher loan at a 90% instead of an 80%, in order to, keep yourself on it, not having two people on it. And that way, you're actually doing your family member a favour, because you're giving them the opportunity to keep their servicing so they can go buy the property. So instead of buying one property for $500, you can buy two properties for $500, one for you and one for them. Number 5 is I currently live in my principal place of residence, and I'm looking to convert it to an investment property while renting elsewhere myself. At what stage should I start booking rental inspections and applying for rental properties myself? I've contacted some investment property managers to get more information about fees, etc., but I haven't heard back yet. I'm worried if I start inspecting real estate properties and rental properties now, I might secure one myself within the next 2 weeks and then not be able to rent out my own place for another 3 months, for example. I'd be paying both for longer than necessarily, or I might rent out my own property too fast and not have enough time to find a place for myself to live. Am I overthinking this? Have you done something similar? Look, I've moved from properties beforehand. I've lived in a couple of my investment properties. I've rented out my principal place of residence, certain things like that. And I don't think you're ever going to time it 100%, right? And moving is a big thing, right? Depending on how much stuff you've got to move, furniture, all that, you're going to need a truck, removalists, all that sort of stuff. You could rent out your property in 2 weeks or 1 week or 2 days or whatever the case may be. Looking at how long it would take you to rent that property out, it depends on the market, depends on the price, depends on how good your agent is. Little spruik out there, if you need help with managing a property, I have national sort of real estate firms, so I could potentially help you with finding a tenant for your property and make that process easier. So reach out to my team on that. But looking at that process, you could list your property for rent. And when you put the property up for rent, you could say, well, this property would be available on, XYZ date. When tenants are looking to apply for a property, if they're a good tenant, right? If they're a good tenant, what I'm saying is that they would have to give a 3-week notice in most circumstances to their landlord. So they would have that same scenario. So if you are looking to find a rental property, if you put your property up for rent and they start showing it this week, next week, the week after, you might secure a tenant next weekend. But then the lease, you could start the lease to say, okay, we can't start this lease until 20 days time, 15 days time, 10 days time, whatever it is. Put that into the contract. And at that point, it gives you the opportunity to go and find another property concurrently and say, I need to be in this property, and there might be a vacant property. So you can sort of navigate both of them, but you might have it vacant for a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, but you don't want it vacant for months because you're going to be paying 2 lots. So planning it, having a strategy, just like anything, is very, very important of when to, be able to make that move and jump over. If you need help on that, as I said, reach out. And that is, first time that we've done What Would Birchy Do? So keep your questions coming through. If you do have burning desire questions or scenarios of what I would do in your situation, feel free to email my team. All emails need to go for this to marketing@binvested.com.au. Carolyn from my team will be putting together for me to answer those questions in here for What Would Birchy Do. As always, guys, if you need help with anything, reach out to us, 1300 367 925. And you can find us every Tuesday here at Google, Spotify, Apple Play, YouTube, and on all our social medias. If you like what I do, make sure you give us a like, share us around with your friends, and look forward to catching up with you next week. Bye for now.
Like Bilal said, man, we're stuck in the matrix. This my advice, don't care if you take it. The dollar about to die, soon to be hyperinflated. This my 2 cents, don't care if you save it. Joint be decentralized and you will see you've been lied to the whole time, and it's the irony, cause they do the exact opposite. You become a slave to the system, enough your money, all they do is profit. There's no conspiracy theory, you better hear me. Crypto will set you free before the system does. I don't care if you do or you don't, but what I'm saying is the truth to the reason you choke. I've never been a failure, excuse my behavior. Keep talking, haters doing me a favor. They all telling lies, I know what they been telling you. I'm the opposite, the Donald Trump of Australia. It's amazing, here for the taking. My time is never wasted, just getting wasted. These girls say I'm really breathtaking. I can't help it if I really misbehaving.